Pre-colonial. Welcome to the first session of this subject, 21st Century Literature from the Philippines and the World. I am your teacher, Mr. Mark Anthony Orpiano. For our session learning targets for this first session, at the end of the session, you are expected to Number one, identify the various dimensions of Philippine literary history from pre-colonial to the contemporary. Second, identify representative texts and authors from each region. And lastly, value the contributions of local writers to the development of regional literary traditions. So again, if you have listened to my subject orientation last time, 21st century literature from the Philippines and the world revolves around critical analysis, critical reading, and analysis and interpretation of literature from the pre-colonial. When we say pre-colonial, before the Philippines is colonized by the colonizers, okay, up to the 21st century today, which is today. So we will be reading a lot of texts, a lot of stories, a lot of genres from these time periods. But first, but first, let's define literature. Okay. Now there are three major points of literature that we have to remember. Okay, literature is not just about words. It's not just about writing. Okay, number one, literature portrays human experience, actually significant human experience. Okay, when we say significant human experience, literature mirrors the various experiences of humanity. Okay, since time immemorial. So from the if you look at history, everything that the history um, records is part of literature. Okay, and everything that literature produces is also part of history because all of it is about significant human experiences. Okay, so let us believe, let us put that in mind when we read poems, short stories, or novels, or different literary texts. It is always about significant human experience. What does humanity experience from that particular text, from that particular time period? Okay, so that's what literature portrays. The second point is that authors interpret these human experiences. Okay, so as a writer, um, we have our own personal experiences and we put that into writing. We interpret those experiences and transform that into short stories, into poetry, into novels, into poems, into epics, right? So it is the authors who primarily interpret these human experiences so that the readers can also share those experiences through reading and critically analyzing what the authors have written. And lastly, literature is an art form and a style of expression. So when we talk of art, it really stretches from different spectrums. It's not just about visual. It's not just about what we see. Okay? Literature is also a form of art in such a way that the way words are woven together to produce something that is beautiful, something that is aesthetic, something that is meaningful or deep, that is also an art form. And it is a style of expression because, again, the authors wanted to say something. And also the readers are able to express something because of what they read. So it's a two-way form of expression. Do you understand? So all these three major points are part, are huge, or are important, essential point when we talk of literature. Now, in this session, we will be having the various dimensions of Philippine literary history from pre-colonial to contemporary times. We also have the canonical authors and works of Philippine national artists in literature. And we will also have the national capital region authors and their works and background of the literature. Now, we start with the Philippine literary history from pre-colonial to contemporary. So before colonization, before the Spanish comes from the Philippines, we already have a varied and solid literary forms. Now, what are these literary periods that we are talking about? From BC to 1564, the pre-colonial period, up to the Spanish period, which spans 333 years or more, and then the American period, where if you studied history, American period promotes the public education system. The Japanese period and the Republic of the Philippines, and then the 21st century, which is the literature of the Philippines today. Now, the pre-colonial period existed before the Spanish occupation in the 1500s. Okay, now it is oral in nature. When we say oral in nature, the stories, the poems, the narratives are passed on from generation to generation by mouth. So it's about storytelling. Okay, now most of the content of literature from this period is about life and its blessings and its consequences. Remember that we don't have solid religion first during the pre-colonial period. The Spanish has not yet introduced Christianity during this period, so it's really about life and blessings and the consequences of life. Those are the topics from this period. However, since the nature of literature here is oral, it is possible that it can be edited, it can be altered from one generation to another because you are transferring the story by mouth. So, well, it is possible that it can be edited, it can be altered, it can be changed. Now, even if that is the case, up until now, we still respect those literary forms from this period, right? Some people from different provinces still believe in superstitions, still believe in proverbs, still believe in myths and legends. So, we still have respect for those kinds of literature from this period. And usually, the literature here comes from local native town folks. Now, the Spanish period is the start of the Philippines' more colorful history when Ferdinand Magellan docked on the shores of Homonhon. Now, there were Filipinos were categorized as Tagabayan or Tagabukid or Tagabundok. And when we say Tagabayan, these are people who lived um, in civil places like easy range of the church and state, while Tagabundok or Tagabukid is called a bruto salvage or Indio, and were the ones who lived far from the center of the Spanish power. The American period um, occurred and had a great leap in education and culture because it is the Americans that promoted education as well as the use of English alongside Filipino languages. There were also free public instruction that were given to the Filipinos, and the literature of during this time period is more of an American model. The writers adopted more American forms when it comes to writing. Um, the Japanese period and the Republic is when the Philippine literature came to a halt. Um, English language was also restricted, and the use of Filipino language was the one mandated under the Japanese rule. Now, to some writers, it is problematic since um, during the American period, they have adopted American forms of literary genres, but to some also it was a blessing in disguise because the writers are actually using the language of the Filipino, which is Filipino. Now, almost all newspapers were stopped except for some, and during this period, there was a break um, in Filipino literature, and topics and themes were often about life in the provinces. Now, the 21st century literature of the Philippines revolves around various literary innovations that are adaptation or originally created by Filipinos. Now, even those who do not have any significant literary background make their own way using the freedom that they have to write and express. So, basically, 21st century literature allows almost everyone to express what they want to express through writing short stories, poetry, narratives. Now, also in this 21st century literature, there are a lot of new forms that are that come out of the basic genres of literature. So, it just proves how innovative, how evolving literature is, and who knows, it will also go far as it can in the next generations to come. Now, let's proceed to the literature of the pre-colonial regions of the Philippines. What are these pre-colonial genres that we grow up knowing? I'm sure you're familiar with all of this. So we have epic poetry and myth. When we say epic poetry, it's a long narrative poem. Usually, epic revolves around adventures of a single main character or usually a folk hero. Okay, and this hero represents the beliefs and traditions and ideas of each region. So, Biyag ni Lamang is an example of epic poetry. Myths or mythologies, these are tales about the supernaturals, the gods and goddesses, but may also have a connection with human lives. Um, Myths are supposed to be sacred. They are considered sacred during the pre-colonial times here in the Philippines. Legends, this one, it is more secular in nature. Um, they're not necessarily supernatural beings, but legends revolve around a specific ritual or sacrifice. Um, the main characters are also human beings. Okay, usually it tells about an origin of something, right? Folktale is kind of whimsical, or there is an irony to it. There is um, something humorous about it. Now, they are intended to entertain, but sometimes folktales also have morals or lessons to learn from. Okay, they're not necessarily to be taken seriously by the readers, but since they also try to entertain, some folktales also try to teach us morals or values or lessons. Philippine folk songs and chants. I'm sure you're familiar with this. These are, again, associated with rituals and ceremonies, especially of a social events of a community. Okay. Proverbs. These are short statements that are delivered, that are written in order to teach a moral or a lesson. Okay. What else? Proverbs also is about keen observation of human behaviors and motivations. Therefore, it reflects human conditions. Riddles, but buktong, right? These are very short and metaphorical statements. Usually, it tries to intrigue our minds, right? It is meant to test the wit of a person. So that's riddles. We use it as games, right? Um, I have here just one question that I want you to answer, reflect and answer. As young learner today who is exposed to social media, how will you encourage young minds to exhibit love and passion for Philippine literature amidst the pandemic we're facing? We all know that this is 21st century, and the ones that I discussed, especially the pre-colonial literature, um, they are not necessarily so existing today, but we still have respect for these types of literary genres. So, how can you encourage your fellow young learners to exhibit love and to promote those Philippine literature amidst the COVID-19 pandemic? So I want you to construct at least 2 to 3 reflection sentences about it, and I want you to post it online. So let's have a summary of our session. So the literature of the Philippines stretches from the pre-colonial period up to the contemporary period, which is today. So in pre-colonial, it shows our customs and traditions in everyday life. Spanish period has more liberal ideas. It has more international influence. American period, there is already the firm establishment of the use of English language. Okay. Japanese period were about life in the provinces and also reflects on social and political realities. And then contemporary period is where writers have more freedom to express themselves. They have more exposure to workshops and here locally and globally, and it also allows the writers to have various exposure because of the internet. For the literature of the pre-colonial regions in the Philippines, we have epic poetry, myths, legends, folktales, folk songs and chants, proverbs, and riddles. Now, why are we studying this? Why should we recognize these types of literary genres throughout the history of our country? Because it is where we can see the faces of our fellow Filipinos. It is where we can hear their voices. It is where we can taste and feel their uniqueness. It is where we can smell our differences. And it is also where we can feel how unified we are as Filipino nation. Literature binds us, okay, and it establishes our oneness, our own identity, which is to become a Filipino. And literature is about being a real human being, which is not only doers of actions but also dreamers of dreams. So once we study this set of literary genres, it allows us to do something and at the same time to dream of something which is beyond 21st century.